And after 3 live action shows already this year, Marvel is dropping their first animated show on us. And the big question is, of course, what if? I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and I'm looking at episode 1 of the Marvel animated show What If. If you haven't seen it, this will be a spoiler-filled review, so this is your chance to check out now. So, I did wonder at the end of Loki, is this going to carry over directly straight away? And no, it doesn't. What we get in this first episode is a reframing of the Captain America story. So what happens is, instead of Steve getting the super soldier serum, it's Peggy Carter and she becomes Captain Carter. Now, if you are familiar with the Marvel comics, you know that there is a Captain Britain and a Captain Britain Corps. These aren't really featured, in fact they aren't even mentioned at all. The closest that she gets is the shield and the uniform, but apart from that, there's no deep tie-ins to it. So all those people that were theorising that we might see Braddock or Captain Britain, I'm sorry, but he doesn't show up in this episode. It's just a great start to introduce people to the multiverse, because I think this is going to be a hard concept for people to get their head round. People that aren't hardcore comic or sci-fi fans, in the long run, they're going to struggle to understand what's going on if they don't watch it from the very start. So the fact that they're retelling a story that most people, or at least 90% of the fan base, is familiar with, is a great introduction, and it's a great framing into how the multiverse is going to work. So who's back? There's a whole load of cast and characters and voice actors that are back. Unfortunately, Chris Evans isn't one of them, but we've got the original Peggy Carter, Bucky Barnes. We've even got Stanley Tucci, and I do wonder if they've just reused his dialogue from the first Captain America, the same way a few other characters as well, or a few other actors as well. I wonder how much of it was new stuff that was recorded, or it was stuff that was taken out. But I guess we'll never know unless they do it behind the scenes, but I don't think Marvel are going to admit that they're holding on to footage or audio recordings from 10 years ago to rehash them into a brand new show to try and sell it to you. I mean, they're not going to do that. Right. But anyway, back on track. It opens with The Watcher. Now, I'm going to do a video on The Watcher sometime next week, so keep an eye out for that. But all these what if stories are going to be introduced from The Watcher's point of view. Now, Peggy taking the super soldier serum does make this episode feel a bit like Wonder Woman, and I mean the good Wonder Woman, because this episode is set during World War II. It's not even set close to 1984, so don't worry about it. It's the good Peggy Carter Wonder Woman. So how does she become Captain Britain or Captain Carter or Captain American Britain? What happens is, during the scene where Steve is about to get into the chamber and get the super soldier serum, the confrontation with the Nazi actually happens there and then, and Steve gets shot. He's not killed, he's wounded, but during the sort of all this chaos, someone has to jump into the booth and take the serum, and it's either Howard Stark or Peggy, and Howard's not having it, so Peggy jumps in straight away, and when she jumps out, she's looking as good as Steve looked. Some would say even better, and in a nice snappy skirt and pair of heels as well. Steve was just barefoot, man, so at least she's a bit harder than Steve straight out the gate. Also, a few other abilities that she has that Steve doesn't seem to have either, but I'll get to that in a minute. Now, the animation in this is absolutely fantastic. I love that they're redoing this Captain America, and I love the animation. It's got this Disney feel to it, because obviously Marvel is owned by Disney. Some of the characters even look like Disney princes or princesses. It's not over the top, but it is enjoyable, and it's not an animation style that I've seen used too often. So for me, it felt really new and fresh. Whether every episode's going to look exactly like this, I'm not entirely sure, but it looks as if the next one, which is a retelling of the Black Panther story, is going to be kind of similar. Main highlights of this episode is Howard Stark. He does get quite a lot of focus because the timelines are now slightly different. So when he's given the option to jump into the booth, he says absolutely no chance at all. So he's not exactly the hero that his son was, but he is still a bit of a progressive guy, because when Peggy steps out and she's the new super soldier, or she's the first super soldier in this case, she sort of has the same reaction that Steve had, that no one takes her seriously. But in this case, it was not because she doesn't have experience, it's because she's a woman. Now, they don't hit us too hard with the whole sexist stuff. It's done incredibly well, and it's pretty accurate to the time. And it just goes to show what women have to overcome and what women had to overcome. There's a great bit at the start where someone says to Peggy, why don't you go to the booth? And she says, no, I'm going to remain here on the floor. And hey, that's the whole stance, and that's her whole stance for this episode. There's also loads of Easter eggs and nods to Captain America, or the first Captain America film. There's also some nods to the Avengers, but I'll get to that in a minute. As you would expect, there's loads of nods and Easter eggs. We see the Red Skull getting the Tesseract, but the main key difference is because Peggy is now the super soldier and not Steve, you would think that Steve is written out of the picture, but he actually hangs about, and the relationship between Peggy and Steve begins to develop, so it's good to see that that translates over into another universe, and it's good to know that Peggy just wasn't after him for those those huge man pecs. So there's loads of Easter eggs and nods to previous Marvel stuff, especially the first Captain America and the first Avengers movie. You see Peggy doing the punch bag therapy that Steve was doing, which I think was a post-credit scene. I can't remember what film it was. I think it was Thor before the first Avengers, and I'm sure that's the scenes and I'm sure the scene is in the first Avengers film as well. And considering Steve didn't get the super soldier serum, he is pretty cool about everything, and it's nice to see that he is still a nice guy without his super soldier abilities either. What is a bit odd about this is when the US or the Allies work out that Red Skull has the cube, they don't really seem to care about it, whereas in the Captain America film, they felt that it was a bit more of a threat, like Hitler developing a nuclear weapon or something like that. So I felt a bit weird that the general, who it isn't Tommy Lee Jones, it's another general, it's another actor, because multiverse, of course, is that they didn't take that seriously. That I thought was a bit strange, but that was my only real criticism of this episode. But this is pretty much a straight role reversal of Peggy and Steve. But one thing that is great is Howard Stark, although I said he might not be the hero like Tony is, he is certainly the genius that Tony is, and he builds Steve his own, I'm not going to say Iron Man suit, although it does look very much like the Mark 1 Iron Man suit from the Iron Man film, but they call it the Hydra Buster or the Hydra Smasher. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. But this does raise a good question for me is, so although this is a multiverse, could it have been that Howard Stark came up with some sort of design for armour in the Second World War, and then Tony seen it and he had it in his head, and then he tried to build it in Afghanistan? You know that Tony had some of Howard's stuff. We've seen the Captain America shield in the first few Iron Man films, and obviously the sort of molecule that Howard designed that Tony had to then finish in Iron Man 2. So did Howard come up with the blueprints, or at least a very rough idea for some sort of powered armour before Tony, and he's just the one that finished it? I don't know. I'll be interested to see what other people think about that. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments below or on Twitter. But because Steve gets an Iron Man suit, he also gets the point of view. And the Iron Man suit for the Second World War, it feels great, it looks great. The bits where he's inside the helmet and the bits where it's flying are absolutely fantastic. It does kind of remind me of the Iron Giant and a few other films. But anyway, seeing Peggy kick Nazi bum is absolutely fantastic. I didn't know how they were going to do the violence, and you just get, they fire bullets and get cut shots. Everything on here looks great. The animation is, I've not seen anything like it, or I've not seen anything that's impressed me so much in so long. I love the retelling of the Captain America story. The bit where they got on the train and they thought that it was Steve that died instead of Bucky, and then the little joke about him almost losing his arm when Peggy tries to lift him up off the side of the train. These are just the things that Marvel do, which there are some deep cuts, there are some light ones, and this just worked perfectly well. But the main sort of outcome or the end of this episode is the Red Skull has got his hands on the Tesseract again, and he's trying to open a multi-dimensional, or he's trying to use it to make a multi-dimensional weapon. Now, this would work in any universe within Marvel as far as I'm aware, because although we've seen the Tesseract transport people through space, basically what it can do in the comics is if you can open a doorway and go between, say, New York and Las Vegas, you can do exactly the same between dimensions. So if they're going to set this up, this is the time to do it. But of course he's trying to summon a big demon, and a lot of people thought this was going to be one of the villains of Doctor Strange, or at least the Doctor Strange comics, but I think it was a unique monster, and it kills Red Skull pretty much straight away. Steve rushes everyone to safety. but his suit runs out of power before he can help Peggy push the monster back into the dimensional rift. And shock horror, because she can travel through dimensions and time and space using the Tesseract, Peggy materialises exactly where Loki did at the start of the first Avengers film, so in the SHIELD complex with Hawkeye and Nick Fury. When they were testing the Tesseract, it's now Peggy that's came through into the modern day. Well, not the modern day, it would have been 2011, 2012. So she has sort of become Loki in this timeline, but she's also become Steve because she's missed the last 95 years. I hope we do get a follow-up to this episode because it does raise a lot of questions, but hey, that's the title of the show at the end of the day, What If? But let me know what you thought of the first episode of What If in the comments below, or you can follow me on Twitter. Subscribe if you want to see more Marvel and more Star Trek videos because there's going to be a lot more of those coming, and thanks for watching.